Welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
I'm Chaz Chidolo.
And that is George the dog. It is a 4th of July holiday weekend special, and it's a 4th of July weekend in the United States like no other. America is experiencing its worst economic collapse since the 1930s, its worst pandemic in a century. Protests over police brutality towards black people continue, and fights over the monuments and symbols of America's racist past are continuing as well, Chaz.
Meanwhile, Russia may have been paying mercenaries to kill Americans in Afghanistan in what some see as an act of war, and the president may have been kept in the dark about it. But it's nothing a bit of a barbecue, a freedom shirt, and a black Labrador can't help.
We'll also be taking a look at why this recession has seen more American women put out of work than men.
And we'll have an update on the race for the White House, because all of that stuff is happening just 4 months from Election Day.
Yeah, but first this week to Russian intelligence, which may have put a bounty on the heads of American and allied forces in Afghanistan and paid Taliban-linked militias when they killed a number of US servicemen. That is the picture that is emerging from a series of reports in the New York Times and the Washington Post this week, which also suggest the White House has known about these bounties for over a year and that it was contained in the president's written daily briefing in late February, but it's widely understood that the president rarely reads those briefings, preferring to get 1 or 2 verbal briefings most weeks. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien says the intelligence on the Russian operation wasn't included in those verbal briefings because at least one CIA analyst lacked confidence in it. But if proven, he says the US will act strongly.
These are important allegations, and if they're verified, I can guarantee you that the president would take strong action. We've been working for several months on options for the president of the United States in the event that this uncorroborated, as the Department of Defense calls it, uncorroborated evidence turned out to be true. It may now be impossible to get to the bottom of this because some government official somewhere decided to leak allegations before we had a chance to get to the bottom of it, and we may never get to the truth of the matter now, and that's really a shame.
But, Chaz, the president says the whole story is a fake.
The Russia bounty story is just another made-up by the fake news tale that is told only to damage me and the Republican Party. The secret source probably does not even exist, just like the story itself. If the discredited New York Times has a source, reveal it. Just another hoax.
So, did the president know about it and fail to say anything publicly, or fail to say anything to the Russians, and if so, why is that? Or did his own staff hide it from him for some reason? Or indeed, is this intelligence really that sketchy that it shouldn't have been out there and the media just shouldn't have jumped on it so early, Chaz?
Well, first of all, I don't know what kind of defence saying the president doesn't read his security briefs is. Yeah. That's not a great defence from my book. But even worse, there's a suggestion out there in the CNN article that his security people are deliberately keeping information from him about Russia because he reacts so badly to bad news about Russia. And so they then put it into the written briefs, knowing that he won't read it, and so therefore he doesn't know about it.
It reminded me of an old episode of Yes Minister from the late 70s where they took home the red boxes of cabinet documents to be gone through every night. If there was something really sensitive they didn't want the minister to see, they'd put in the 3rd or 4th box, knowing they would never get to it. Sound a bit like that.
Well, that's funny when it's Yes Minister. It's not funny when it's the American president in real life with Russia. Now, having said that may be the case, and if it is the case, Trump hasn't done his job. But that's nothing that would surprise a number of people. But that tweet you just played, that's a whole new ballgame, because that tweet came 5 days after the story broke. Now, let me tell you what we learned before Trump tweeted that. We learned the date that this report appeared in his daily briefing, allegedly, February 27. Now, if that's not true, it should be easy to rebut. We learnt the identity of an Afghan who is suspected to be a key middleman who handed out money for Russian military, and he's been named by both American and Afghan officials. We also learnt that US intelligence services found a bank account and evidence of some of the transactions that took place. That should also be easy to confirm or to rebut. We have independent reporting on this story from no less than the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, CNN, Fox News, NBC, CBS, ABC and Sky News in the UK.
This is a massive conspiracy.
Yes. We've got both sides of Congress being briefed by Trump's own intelligence services about this story. We played a clip from his intelligence head there confirming the report.
Yeah.
We have Republican lawmakers themselves confirming to the Washington Post that the intelligence exists, and yet Trump says that the whole story is probably made up by the New York Times to make Republicans look bad. That is a pathetic effort, to be honest. I don't normally use that word, but that is pathetic. And it shows to me how little respect he's got for his own supporters' intelligence. He thinks he can get away with that. Now, I'm not even necessarily bothered that Trump didn't do anything beforehand, to be honest, because he might not have known about it, like we said. Maybe the intelligence hadn't been adequately confirmed. We don't know that, right? Even Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff's staff was apparently briefed about this intelligence back in February. And he took no action in response, so he held no meetings, he didn't brief other committee members. So at least some people didn't think it was worth doing anything with. By the way, when Schiff was asked if he'd known about this story beforehand, he said, "I can't comment on the specifics." But for the last week, Trump has definitely known about that story. No more excuses, and there's plenty of evidence out there. So what's he doing about it now, apart from denying the story even exists?
Yeah.
He's going to need to do better than that, John, because attack ads like this are going to sting.
Any commander-in-chief with a spine would be stomping the living shit out of some Russians right now. Diplomatically, economically, or, if necessary, with the sort of asymmetric warfare they're using to send our kids home in body bags. I'm a pro-life, gun-owning combat veteran, and I can see Trump for what he is, a coward. We need to send this draft dodger back to his golf courses. The lives of our troops depend on it.
Wow.
Now, I think we can say a couple of things for sure. We don't know how sketchy or otherwise this intelligence was, but it sounds solid enough that there have been a lot of people briefed on this, including National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Now, it was O'Brien's choice to not make this a part of the verbal briefing that he knew the president would get. It was also O'Brien's choice not to brief the president in his numerous phone calls with Vladimir Putin in the last year since America has gotten wind of this bounty plot going on. So a lot of this falls to Bolton last year and O'Brien since September of last year when he took up that job, basically keeping the president in the dark, if that's in fact what they did, if this is actual deniability rather than plausible deniability. And the other thing, of course, that we know for sure is, as you say, that Trump tweet, that him calling the whole thing another hoax, well, that's exactly the response that clearly O'Brien and others were fearful of. Yeah. That's what he was going to say if they briefed him on it, that he was going to reject this, and that would then potentially create an even bigger scandal that the president was rejecting this intelligence. So maybe they were trying to, in a weird way, protect the president.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
Like that is a great call. If he had reacted exactly like that at the time, it would have been worse.
He'd be impeached again and acquitted again. So look, let's try and get an expert opinion on all of this. Is this fake news? Is this a major international incident? Or maybe even a sign that the president's own staff are really giving him the mushroom treatment at this point? Danielle Petka is one of America's leading foreign policy analysts. She's a senior fellow at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Danielle Petka, welcome back to the Fireside Chat.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be back. Thank you.
So President Trump says the whole thing is a hoax. Do you think it's a hoax?
There are any number of possibilities about the quality of this information. It could be false, it could be bad intelligence, but it's just as likely that the president either heard it or ignored it or was never provided this information by his aides.
If they did do it, why do you think Russia would do something like this?
The Russians have been engaged in attacks against us, against the British, against the Germans, against the people of Syria for many years now. The notion that they would seek to humiliate us in Afghanistan, a place where the United States had a hand in humiliating the Soviet Union in the 80s, is totally credible, very believable, and very much in character for Vladimir Putin.
Danielle, why would Russia need to offer financial incentives to the Taliban to get them to kill Americans when they were already at war with America and they were doing perfectly fine at killing Americans on their own?
That's an absolutely great question. Why do you need to pay people to kill somebody when they already want to kill them? And the answer to that is that we have been engaged in negotiations with the Taliban, setting aside the wisdom of that, for more than a year. And part of those negotiations involved the Taliban cutting down attacks on American targets. So perhaps the Russians felt that with a little bit of additional financial incentive, they may be willing to resume.
Now, Danielle, the AP says that John Bolton, and I quote, told colleagues he briefed Trump on the intelligence assessment in March 2019. Now, you're a colleague of John Bolton's at the American Enterprise Institute. So did he tell you?
I'm not a colleague of John Bolton's at the American Enterprise Institute. He left AEI when he joined the White House, and he has not since returned. He has certainly not shared classified information with me since he left the White House, nor did he do so. And frankly, he shouldn't have been sharing classified information with the Associated Press either.
So what do you make of the Trump administration's response to this week in particular, and the plausibility that maybe the president knew absolutely nothing about it?
Look, in Washington, if somebody tells you Donald Trump didn't listen to an intelligence briefing, it's pretty credible. Despite the fact that these briefings are intended to be every day, he doesn't take them every day. He tends not to absorb written information from what we've understood. And I have no doubt that there may have been a decision by his senior national security officials not to provide him with information if they felt it was unreliable or they felt that he might repeat it. There are any number of credible reasons why he indeed may not have known.
So could this mean that the president's staff were actually withholding this kind of intelligence from the president?
Anything is possible in this administration. We have seen that his staff has kept information from him previously when they were worried about it being revealed in a conversation. But we've also seen in much more normal administrations, we have seen senior officials not provide information when they felt that it wasn't reliable or they felt that it wasn't solid and they wanted more from the intelligence community. We'd like to hope that was the reason. I'm afraid it might not be.
Now, forgetting for a second whether Trump knew about this story before, he's definitely known about this story for the last week. So what do you think he should have done over this week?
Look, it would have been very easy for Donald Trump to say, I'm very concerned about this information. I wish I had been briefed sooner. I'm going to raise this with President Putin the next time I speak with him. And if we find information that this was true, there will be consequences for Russia. That's the easy thing to do. Donald Trump almost never does the easy thing to do, never does the presidential thing, and he didn't do it in this instance.
Now, there'll be people watching this who might think, Trump's just trying to keep America out of a war with Russia. He should be commended for that. What do you have to say to them?
Well, first of all, this isn't a casus belli with Russia. We're not about to go to war with a nuclear-armed state over the intelligence that they may or may not have been paying terrorists to kill Americans. If we were going to do that, we would have gone to war with Iran a long time ago, since they pay and arm people to kill Americans and have been responsible for the death of hundreds and hundreds of U.S. soldiers in Iraq. So I don't think that's a legitimate excuse. I don't see a legitimate foreign policy excuse here. I can see a personality and a character excuse. I can even see a credible intelligence excuse. I do not see a foreign policy excuse.
So if the story is here that in fact Trump did receive the intelligence, but that he basically, not for the first time, sided with Russia over US intelligence agencies, how concerned about that would you be?
It's always troubling when the president chooses the wrong side. It's a 50-50 proposition for us here in America, what he's going to do on any given day. But the notion that he would give the benefit of the doubt to Mr. Putin is something he's done before, and I suspect he'll do again. Will that cement in the minds of people that he has a soft spot for the world's dictators? Yes, it will, but we already knew that.
Danielle, this week we've seen a flood of leaks to over 10 news outlets, and it's super classified material as well. Not to mention Carl Bernstein's story about Trump's phone calls to foreign dignitaries. Are you at all worried about just how prolifically the intelligence services are leaking at the moment?
I'm so grateful that you asked that question, because we spend so much time obsessing about the president's many character flaws and decisions. We don't talk about the character flaws of those who are obsessed by their hatred of Donald Trump. And those people in the intelligence community who are leaking, those people in the White House who are bound by their oaths not to leak information, are in fact as guilty as the president is alleged to be. They are dishonoring their commitments. They are harming our intelligence collection abilities. They are harming the people who provide us information overseas. They are as much, if not more guilty than Donald Trump of betraying their country.
And where would you say this leaves the peace process in Afghanistan between the US and the Taliban?
God, I really hope it leaves it in tatters. What a travesty of a peace process it's been. We have, thrown our allies in Kabul under the bus. We have cut a deal with the terrorist organization that facilitated the attacks of 9/11. And then gone so far as to have the President of the United States invite them to Camp David on the anniversary of 9/11 to discuss this ridiculous peace plan. I hope it goes away. I hope it undercuts it. It has been an embarrassment to this administration and to the people who negotiated it.
Danielle Petka, many thanks indeed for your time.
Thanks for having me.
The President of the United States will be celebrating the 4th of July at an event at the iconic Mount Rushmore this weekend, drawing criticism, though, that without social distancing, like his recent rallies in Tulsa, it poses the risk of further coronavirus transmission. More than 30 states now have seen a spike in new cases. Texas Governor Greg Abbott earlier today making the wearing of face masks mandatory in all counties with more than 20 infections. That's most of them. A 10 p.m. curfew has been imposed in Miami-Dade County. And Chaz, we are certainly seeing some alarming new figures, with the number of new infections now reaching 57,000 at last count. That's in one day.
Yes, and it's going up fast, John. They've almost doubled the daily cases in just 2 weeks. But the most important thing is that the deaths are still not rising. And yet, maybe we're getting to the point where they won't rise. Usually what comes before a rise in deaths is a big rise in hospitalisations. And if we go through the 3 worst affected states, Arizona has seen over 3,000 new cases a day, and it has a worrying 24% of tests coming back positive. Remember, 10% is bad. But if we look at Arizona's hospitalisations, yes, they're going up, but they're still well under control. In Texas, new cases are now consistently over 6,000 a day. 14% of the tests are coming back positive. And their hospitalisations are increasing rapidly, yet they still have 12,000 free beds left over. They're not even halfway there. Finally, Florida, which has seen the worst case numbers we've seen for this entire pandemic, even worse than New York, with more than 10,000 cases today. And 16% of the tests are coming back positive right now, so that's bad as well. But if we look at hospitalisations, again, I should say their numbers tend to be slightly dubious, but these are their numbers. While they're as bad as they've been for Florida so far, they are still far from out of control. And I think this is something we need to bear in mind when we see statements like this from Anthony Fauci.
We are now having 40+ thousand new cases a day. I would not be surprised if we go up to 100,000 a day if this does not turn around. And so I am very concerned.
Okay, so that got huge amounts of press. 100,000 cases a day, But maybe we need to stop talking about cases. If the hospitalisations aren't going up by a massive amount, if the deaths aren't coming, maybe the cases aren't a big deal. Like, certainly, I mean, we might have already seen 100,000 cases a day. We don't know how many are out there. The CDC, just this week, said that there were maybe 10 times as many cases out there than we know about.
Yep.
So maybe there's more than 100,000 cases a day right now. We're just not measuring them.
Yeah,
maybe
we've certainly learned that there's something different happening in the south and west, with the median age going down from 50-something to about 38, 37. Obviously, that means it's a much less vulnerable group. And if has been suggested, even in places like Arizona, that this is affecting younger people because older people are continuing to shelter in their homes. They're not employed, they're retirees, they do not have to go to their job, they don't have to leave the house, they're more inclined to hear those health warnings and so on. So maybe it is going to be different to New York and New Jersey. Maybe. That's the hope, but it's a huge concern that we are seeing this massive spike. And yes, we're seeing now a bit of softening of the president's previous rather irrational stance against the wearing of face masks. Mike Pence in the past week has been seen wearing face masks for the first time. Maybe, just maybe, we're getting to a more sensible point and away from the politicisation of personal responsibility and health.
Fingers crossed, because even though I'm putting on this sunny face here when I'm saying, yeah, maybe it's not so bad, it's not meant to be bad now. This is the middle of summer.
Right.
It's meant to be bad in 3 months' time.
Yeah, this is the time of year when everyone's outside enjoying the sunshine. It's when they get back inside in the cold weather.
So they'd want to get this under control because it's going to get worse.
Yeah, unfortunately so. All right, let's have a look at the economic situation in the United States now, because the latest unemployment figures have come out in the last few hours and they're looking actually very encouraging. The economy added a record 4.8 million new jobs in the month of June, with unemployment falling to 11.1%, down from a peak of 14.7% in April, but still way up from pre-COVID days in February when it was at 3.5%. But all seems to be heading in the right direction, Chaz, except, of course, when you see these infections are going up, and even if the hospitalisations and the deaths are not yet going up, economic activity is coming down again, and this is going to have a big economic impact, and we're going to see people losing jobs all over again.
Yeah, look, those unemployment figures, that on the surface, they look great, but even before we get to COVID, you got to remember, many of those workers coming back are those who were temporarily laid off at the beginning, right?
Furloughed.
Yeah, like if you have a look here, this is what the unemployment rate looks like. This is what it looks like if you remove that misclassification we spoke about a few weeks back. The Boffins have been struggling with this over the last few months, but it's slightly higher percent, and that's fine. It's coming down, just like the normal unemployment rate's coming down. But look at the core unemployment rate. These are the permanently unemployed workers and the ones who don't look like they'll be getting a job anytime soon. That is going up. Even this month, it's still going up to 6%, and it's still rising. That is what, when we get past the bounce back, that's what the unemployment rate's actually going to be. 6% now, might be 7, might be 8 by then. That's going to be a problem. The best way to illustrate this is by showing just how big a task America faces in dealing with the unemployment situation. You can see there was a big drop in total employment in April. That's total jobs. Now there's a rebound. Look at that, 5 million jobs in the last month. Big rebound, that's great. But look how big the hole still is. That will take many months of 5 million jobs a month to fill. Could take years. And that is assuming there aren't any more hiccups, which leads to what you just talked about, the COVID spike. We've already seen a hiccup in the last 2 weeks. These are the retail and restaurant visits in America recently, according to Google, and they know this stuff. Notice how the comeback was on until the last 2 weeks when the COVID spike hit again, and now things are flattening out again. The info from this month's unemployment report, that's from 3 weeks ago, okay? So that's before that flattening out period. So next month's report might not be quite so rosy. We should warn you in advance. On the plus side, though, the USMCA started yesterday, which has gotten a little bit of press. This is Trump's updated version of NAFTA, of course. He's very happy about this. Have a look.
The USMCA is the largest, fairest, most balanced and modern trade agreement ever achieved. This is a colossal victory for our farmers, ranchers, energy workers, factory workers, and American workers in all 50 states. Together, we're building a glorious future that is raised, grown, built, and made right here in the glorious USA.
Okay, so he's got the orchestra out.
Yeah.
They're having a good time. Contrary to that ad, most economists don't think it's going to have a huge effect, but it's better than nothing, especially seeing as America has got a bit of a problem at the moment, which doesn't get talked about enough. Last month, total income for people went up, which was a surprise in the middle of a recession, except people's wages went down. The difference? $2 trillion worth of payments from the government. That's the difference. Now, that is what's keeping America afloat at the moment, and most of those payments are going to expire at the end of this month. Congress has been saying they'll do something. They've been doing nothing. So unless Congress do something about that, we might only currently be seeing the beginning of the economic damage.
Yeah.
That's the concern.
Yeah, and it's a very valid concern. It's going to clearly force Congress to act. Mitch McConnell is saying, yes, we are going to get to something, and the President is saying, hey, Congress wants to give you even more money than I do. So they're kind of, trying to egg each other on to take some action in all this. But there is a concern that President Trump has, just as he was for quite a long time there, really kind of hoping piously that, with hydroxychloroquine there would be a miracle cure to the coronavirus. He's been looking for a miracle economic cure, and it's just not coming. And with this new spike, any hopes of this being a V-shaped recovery have just vanished.
But the concern is the figures are always on a lag.
Yeah.
And so the latest figures are fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this. And it'd be very tempting for people in Congress, especially Republicans who don't like spending government money, generally speaking, to just go, we're okay. We've got 5 million jobs in the last month. Let's just wait another month or two and see. If they wait another month or two and see, it's going to be too late.
The economic damage caused by the coronavirus has certainly reached far and wide across the United States and around the world. But like the virus itself, it's becoming clear that some groups are even more vulnerable than others. And right now, when it comes to unemployment in the United States, women are suffering significantly more than men are. According to official figures in March, an equal proportion, 4% of men and 4% of women were unemployed, while just 2 months later, that had risen to 7.6% for men and almost 10% for women. So what is going on? Joining us to tell us is Heidi Scherholz. She was the chief economist at the Department of Labor during the Obama administration. Dr. Scherholz, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
What would you say are the key reasons for the higher female than male unemployment rate at the moment?
In this coronavirus recession, we're definitely seeing disproportionate job loss amongst women relative to men. That's actually unusual for recessions. Usually recessions happen, women are slightly more sheltered because women tend to be concentrated in jobs like healthcare, education, that tend to be more sheltered from normal recessions. This is far from a normal recession. And what we're seeing here is that the jobs that got hit the hardest are frontline service jobs that have a lot of social interaction, that were really shut down because of social distancing measures. Women disproportionately hold those jobs. So women have just been hit extremely hard in this recession.
I'm particularly interested in the role that childcare is playing in all of this. On the one hand, about 400,000 women in that sector have lost their jobs, but that is also creating a shortage of childcare places, and more women seem to be staying at home and being the principal carers for their kids. So how is all this playing out?
Those are very good questions, and you're absolutely right. We see women being really hit by closures of the childcare sector, of schools. They're disproportionately employing women, and so when those sectors shut down, a lot of women are thrown out of work. At the same time, women are more likely to shoulder responsibilities for care at home. And so when kids can no longer be in daycare or instead at home, if it's a male-female couple that's taking care of those kids, it's likely that even if dad tries to pitch in, it's on average, women are disproportionately shouldering that work. And so it can really take a hit in places where women are trying to telework, but also trying to do care work. Perhaps a male and a female in a couple are both trying to telework. It may be impacting the woman's job a lot more. So how this is going to play out will be interesting to see, but I am concerned that it's going to pretty drastically exacerbate existing inequalities by gender in our labor market.
And are there any other groups other than women that have been particularly hard hit by this economic crisis so far?
Yep. In the U.S., we're seeing women get hit hard, and we're also seeing Black and brown workers. And if you put those two things together, Black women, Hispanic women, and Asian women are all getting hit really hard by this recession. They all have extremely high unemployment rates, extremely high rates of, the way we count unemployment, you're not counted as officially unemployed unless you're actively seeking work. But you can also measure the number of people who are out of work as a result of this virus, but are not officially unemployed because they're not actively seeking work. You also see higher numbers of that amongst Black women, Hispanic women, and Asian women. So sort of any way you look at it, you're seeing women, people of color, and putting those together, Black women, Hispanic women, Asian women just really bearing the brunt of this recession.
Dr. Schiff, we've been speaking a lot today about that new spike in COVID cases. Should we now expect a second spike in unemployment like it was back in April, or do you think it's not quite that bad yet?
That is a good question. It's hard to know. I feel like I've been wrong a bunch of times trying to predict things in the last 3 months, but just going out on a limb again, I would say yes. That's what we saw last time. We saw a spike in COVID claims, and that's followed by businesses shuttering, governments shuttering, saying businesses need to shutter, and then people just being nervous and pulling back even if they could go out. And then that will lead to job loss because businesses won't see demand for their goods and services. I do think that's what we're going to see this time around. Maybe somewhat less than in the very beginning, but you see a big spike in COVID cases. It's really hard to imagine job loss is not going to come along with that.
Dr. Heidi Scherholz, thank you for having a fireside chat.
Oh, thanks. It was my pleasure.
It's 4 months until the US presidential election, but if it were being held tomorrow, Joe Biden would be about to become the 46th president of the United States. He's leading in the average of national polls by almost 9.5 percentage points this week. And a major series of polls from CNBC and Change Research yesterday found Biden 8 points ahead nationally, and the battleground states are just as bad. Biden leading in Pennsylvania by 6, Michigan by 5, Wisconsin by 8, North Carolina by 7, so maybe that poll last week wasn't an outlier, Florida by 5 and Arizona by 7. And this was a poll of over 1,600 voters. That's big for a sample size, and it means it's got a small margin of error, 1.6%. That's half the usual margin. Punch those numbers into the Electoral College right now, Chaz, and Joe Biden sitting pretty on 333 to Trump's 205. You need 270, of course, to win the presidency. And that is looking a very long way off for President Trump right now. Meanwhile, Donald Trump continues to try and drum up the issue of Confederate statues, issuing an executive order this week to preserve monuments from protesters. But it was the Democratic mayor of Richmond, Virginia, LeVar Stoney, who decided it was now time to pull down a statue of General Stonewall Jackson this week. Now, Stonewall Jackson wasn't the worst of the Confederate generals. He was actually a brilliant soldier and a deeply religious man who taught black students at Sunday school. And he's thought to have been personally against slavery, but he also thought it was God's will that they had slavery, and he fought against the United States to preserve the institution of slavery. So he's not that great. So down the statue came this week, and a nearby statue of General Robert E. Lee, the head honcho of Confederate generals, it was also slated for removal last month, but that's been tied up in a bunch of lawsuits right now. So Ralph Northam hasn't been able to get that removed. But also this week, we discussed on Planet America, the state of Mississippi finally retired the last state flag in America to include the Confederate battle standard. And in other developments this week, Chaz, 3 of the major sponsors of the Washington football team, known as the Redskins, have called on the team to change their name. People have been pushing for this for decades. Yeah. And Democrats in Washington, D.C. are saying that plans for the team to build their new stadium, where RFK Stadium is currently now on federal land, will not get it through Congress unless they change the name. So a lot of corporate and political pressure being brought to bear. And Bill de Blasio, Mayor of New York City, he wants to paint a big Black Lives Matter sign on Fifth Avenue, very close to Trump Tower as it happens. But the president is not a fan of that, suggesting that police could try and stop the sign from going up.
Maybe our great police, who have been neutralized and scorned by a mayor who hates and disrespects them, wouldn't let this symbol of hate be affixed to New York's greatest street.
Now, describing a Black Lives Matter sign as a symbol of hate is a little bit of an escalation of the president's rhetoric this week, and it prompted some to suggest this new Trump campaign symbol, which is being sold on official Trump t-shirts this week, is a little bit too close to this symbol of the Nazi Party.
Oh dear.
Although it's also not that dissimilar to the Great Seal of the United States, to be fair. So who knows where they got their inspiration from, Chaz?
I don't know, John, but if we're going to go down the Hitler Road, we have barely scratched the surface.
All right.
At the same time as that shirt came out, Trump tweeted this about army bases named after Confederate generals. "This is a battle to save the heritage, history and greatness of our country." Okay, so note the heritage and history words. We'll come back to them. You might not realise that there is a very famous slogan associated with neo-Nazis. It's "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children." Those are called the 14 words, okay? Turns out that tweet of Trump's was 14 words long. But wait, H is the 8th letter of the alphabet, John. So HH, which is short for Heil Hitler, is represented by 88 or 88. And that tweet was apparently 88 characters long. Although when I counted it, it was 87. But maybe it's a spaces thing, I don't know. Finally, heritage and history, which I mentioned before there, have H and H right in the middle there. Heil Hitler from a Trump tweet. But wait, there's more, John.
Yes.
A few weeks back, the Trump campaign put out this ad with a red triangle for Antifa. Antifa don't usually use a red triangle, but back in the concentration camp days, John, one of the many triangles the Nazis used was red. And guess how many different ads they ran with that triangle? 88! And get this, the first sentence in the ad, 14 words long.
This is huge.
But it doesn't end there. Guess how many immigrant children were initially reported by Health and Human Services as being lost in the system a few years back?
Tell me.
1488.
Oh my goodness.
It's all coming together. Is it possible?
Can we get some tinfoil for Mr. Licciardello on set?
I'm not being serious. Is it possible that Trump has some alt-right guys somewhere on staff who find it hilarious to smuggle in super subtle Nazi references into Trump's marketing materials? Yeah, and they do it to troll lefties?
Sure,
maybe. That's the kind of thing some of these guys do. But does that mean Trump or his team are trying to seriously engage with Nazis? No, I don't think it does. How many Nazi sympathisers are there in America? And how many of them go through all 103 T-shirts in Trump's merchandising shop and pick out that eagle one, and then they count the number of characters in his tweets for subtle Nazi sympathising clues? Personally, I think there's none of them, but let's be generous. Let's say a few thousand do. I would argue pretty much all of them would be voting for Trump already anyway. But what's he risk by playing footsies with Nazis? He risks the vote of every single suburban mum, every single college-educated person, millions of votes. It doesn't make any sense for this to be an intentional strategy from Trump, in my book. But what I do think is likely to have happened is that there's a bunch of lefties out there who are looking for reasons desperately to think of Trump as a secret Nazi, so they have an excuse to hate him even more and to vilify his supporters.
Yeah.
That's what I think is personally going on. What do you reckon?
Well, look, and obviously the week began with the president himself tweeting out a video clip which included some Trump supporters yelling, "White power, white power, white power." President Trump took it down after 3 hours. Senator Tim Scott called the president apparently and said, "This is a real problem, you've got to take this thing down." And the White House communications staff said that President Trump didn't listen to the audio. He just saw people with Trump signs on their golf cart, arguing against these protesters, etc. So he wasn't listening to the white power, white power, white power. But still, President of the United States tweets a video clip with people chanting white power. So clearly, people are alert to Nazi overtones right now. But look, I think the reality is probably, conspiracy or cock-up. I suspect the reality is kind of more mundane, that somebody who's designing Trump stuff was going for a similarly nationalistic, strongman, kind of a look. Yeah, the eagle is used in the American seal. It was a much more Germanic look. If you bring those back up again, it is a lot closer, I would say, to the kind of thing produced by the Nazi Party than by the Great Seal of the United States. But still, we're still talking about a brand of nationalism that many people say is only half a step removed from fascism anyway. Hence the sensitivity. And if it weren't for the fact that we've got a president who routinely cozies up to authoritarians and treats democratic allies, including Australia, we learnt this week from the CNN piece by Carl Bernstein, something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. It's a genuine concern. Whether this is deliberate, whether this is subconsciously just sort of dabbling with these memes and so on, not knowing enough about history, I think it's safe to assume that from everything that we've read, this president is ignorant of a lot of things, including history. He doesn't necessarily know the hot buttons he's pushing.
Yeah, he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who counts the number of characters that he's tweeting out.
No, the character counting stuff gets very QAnon. That's kind of beyond Da Vinci Code into some very weird territory.
Remember, this is a guy who tweets out sometimes 200 times a day. So, I don't think he puts a lot of thought into his tweets. And I find it very easy to believe that he didn't hear the white power in the video, because he probably spends 1 second watching a video before he retweets it.
Yeah.
Because he just doesn't think. Just bang, 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 just tweeting. And I'm not defending his tweets.
Yeah.
And I'm not defending the nationalism that you're referring to, because I agree. It does get borderline sometimes in nationalism. But I just think when people start talking about as if there's some kind of, as if he's a secret Nazi trying to send out code through his merchandise.
Yep.
Seems like an overreaction to me.
The big thing that I don't get in all of this is, why is President Trump standing up for Confederate monuments, which by definition are monuments to traitors to the United States who fought to preserve the institution of slavery, the retaining black humans as chattels? Why is he fighting for that at a time when one of his paths to possible re-election is to skim between 3 and 5% of the African-American vote away from Joe Biden? Why is he doing this now? Why is he describing Black Lives Matter as a hate group, as a terrorist group, given that Black Lives Matter now has 70% approval in the white suburban belt that he also needs to reclaim some support in? He seems to be shooting himself in the foot here.
It's a terrible tactic. There was an article this week to that point, which I wasn't going to bring up because it's anonymous sources, but it's relevant, so I'll bring it up, which suggests that Trump has apparently been annoyed about Jared Kushner's push to win over black votes. He regrets the criminal justice reform that he signed, and he said no more woke shit. No more of Jared Kushner's woke shit. So he's decided to just double down on the base, because he thinks that's what's going to win him the election. He knows he's in trouble, and his response is always to double down and try and get more of the base out. If that is the truth, I don't know if that's the truth. If that's the truth, I think he's wrong, and I think it's a terrible mistake, and he should listen to Jared Kushner. Okay,
well, when we're back on the air in a couple of weeks, we'll be heading towards the conventions. We don't know whether there'll be people at those conventions or not. Will those people be wearing masks or not? Or will it be all done for TV? And then we've got the debates. It's going to be a pretty wild ride between now and November 4.
It will.
All right, that is it for this Fireside Chat. We are taking 2 weeks off the air. We'll be back with a new episode of Planet America on Wednesday, the 22nd of July, and a Fireside Chat that Friday as well.
But keep an eye out for a pet podcast or two, including right now, actually. There's one right now, because talking for hours about American politics in a small airless room, that's my idea of a holiday.
Bye-bye.